This is my true story. I gave everything I had to my family. I built a home, worked long hours, and made sure they never went hungry. But when I lost my job and had nowhere to go, they turned their backs on me. They laughed when I slept on the streets, called me useless, and forgot I was the one who raised them. I cried, but not for long, because a few months later, I walked into their house again, but now as a millionaire. What happened next left them frozen. Before I tell you, comment where you're watching from and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I had worked my whole life for them. Every meal they ate, every roof they slept under, every piece of comfort they enjoyed, it came from my hands. But when I grew old and weak, everything changed. One evening, my son told me there was no more space in the house. I stood there, stunned, unable to speak. The home I built with my own money, the walls I painted, the garden I planted, none of it belonged to me anymore. My daughter looked away, pretending not to care. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms and called me a burden. They didn't even let me pack properly. My clothes were thrown into a small bag. The door closed behind me like it had never opened for me before. I stood outside in the cold, looking at the lights glowing through the windows. Inside, they were laughing, eating dinner, enjoying warmth. Outside, I was alone, holding a bag of memories. That night, I sat on the sidewalk near the gate, the same gate I once built with pride. The same gate my hands had painted many times. The same gate my family now locked against me. The first night was the hardest. The ground was cold, the streetlights dim. I didn't know where to go. I had never imagined I would sleep under the open sky. I closed my eyes and thought of the years I had carried my children to school, the nights I stayed up working so they could have better lives. And now, all that effort was forgotten, replaced by one cruel sentence: "You're old. Go live somewhere else." The next morning, I watched my son leave for work. The car he drove was bought with my money. The suit he wore was from a gift I once gave. My son didn't even look at me. He just walked past, pretending the man sitting outside was a stranger. My daughter came out later with coffee in her hand, her eyes meeting mine for a second. There was no pity, only annoyance. She shut the gate quickly, as if the sight of me made her uncomfortable. Day after day, it was the same. I tried to speak to them, tried to remind them who I was, but they didn't listen. They said I should be thankful they let me stay near the gate. The words broke something inside me. I stopped talking. I stopped hoping. I just sat quietly, watching my own family live like I had never existed. At night, I could hear them laughing. Sometimes I heard my name mentioned, followed by laughter. They laughed at the man who once paid for everything. They laughed at the man who gave them the house they slept in. To them, I was now just an old fool who had nothing left. Their laughter echoed through the street, cutting deeper than the cold wind. I tried to find help, but everyone turned away. Neighbors avoided me. Old friends didn't recognize me. I had gone from a respected man to a shadow in front of my own home. The betrayal was heavy, but I said nothing. There was no point in speaking when no one wanted to hear. As the days passed, I began to accept the pain. I ate little, drank water from public taps, and wrapped myself in an old blanket. I watched life go on without me. The same people I loved now treated me like a stranger. The same hands that once hugged me now pushed me away. I didn't cry anymore. Tears couldn't change anything. I told myself one thing every night. I gave them everything. They took it all. Now they have nothing left to take. That thought kept me alive. Somewhere deep down, I believed life would give me a chance again. Maybe not soon, but someday. I had built everything once before. I could do it again. But this time, I wouldn't build it for them. I would build it for myself. The nights grew colder. I found an empty corner near the streetlight and made it my spot. The ground was hard, the air heavy. I used cardboard as a pillow and an old blanket to keep warm. Each time a car passed, I turned my face away. I didn't want anyone to see what I had become. But they saw me anyway. Neighbors walked by, whispering, shaking their heads. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment. No one offered help. My family saw me too. From the balcony, my son looked down and laughed. My daughter pointed me out to her friends, as if I were a stranger, not the man who once carried her on his shoulders. Even the little ones, my grandchildren, giggled when they saw me curled up on the sidewalk. They didn't understand, but their laughter still hurt. I pulled the blanket over my face and pretended to sleep. It was easier than facing the truth. One evening, hunger became too much. I went to the trash bins behind the local shops, searching for leftover food. My hands shook as I dug through plastic bags. I found half a sandwich, still wrapped. I smiled faintly, thankful for something to eat. But then, I heard voices. My family stood across the street, watching me. They didn't look away. They were laughing, loud enough for me to hear. That laughter burned deeper than any wound. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just stood there, holding the sandwich, while they turned and went back inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat up, staring at the sky. I felt small, forgotten, invisible. The stars above me looked cold and distant, like the people I had once called my own. I thought about everything I had done for them, the house, the education, the comforts. And now, those same people treated me like dirt under their feet. I wondered if kindness was a mistake, if giving too much makes people lose respect. Days turned into weeks. I grew thinner. My clothes wore out. I stopped talking to anyone. Each morning, I watched my family come and go as if I were a piece of the street. I became part of the background, a shadow outside their gate. Strangers sometimes threw coins my way. I didn't pick them up. Pride was the only thing I had left. Once, an old neighbor came by and recognized me. "You built that house," the man said softly. I nodded, but didn't reply. What was there to say? I had built it, yes, but I no longer belonged there. The neighbor shook his head and walked away. Even pity was painful now. Sometimes, when rain fell, I sat under a broken shelter. Water leaked through holes, soaking my blanket. I shivered, but stayed quiet. I told myself it wouldn't last forever. Something inside me refused to die. A small voice kept saying, "You are not done." I didn't know how or when, but I believed it. Even in the worst pain, I believed life still had something left for me. I saw my son drive past one morning in a new car. The engine roared as it left the gate, the same car bought with money I had once earned. I smiled weakly. It didn't hurt anymore. I had reached a point beyond anger, beyond tears. All that was left inside me was silence. Silence that watched. Silence that waited. At night, when everything was quiet, I sometimes whispered to myself. Not prayers, just memories. Names, faces, moments. I remembered laughter, but not the kind I heard now. I remembered love, but not the kind that vanished when I needed it most. And in those moments, something strange happened. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Instead, I felt sorry for them. Because one day, I knew they would face their own emptiness. I didn't know how my life would change, but I knew one thing. I would not die on that street. Not like this. I had lost my home, my family, my pride. But I still had my will. And that was enough to start again. After many nights on the street, I stopped counting the days. I woke when the sun touched my face and slept when the noise of the city faded. Hunger became normal. Cold became a habit. Each day was about finding something small to keep me alive. I collected plastic bottles, old cans, anything I could sell. I learned which shops gave leftovers and which guards didn't chase me away. I stopped hoping for comfort. I just wanted to make it to the next morning. I found a group of other poor men living near the bus station. We shared what we had. Sometimes a loaf of bread, sometimes a cup of soup. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me I was still human. We talked quietly at night, telling each other about our pasts. Some had lost jobs, others had lost families. I didn't tell my full story. I only said, "My family forgot me." That was all I needed to say. I worked when I could. At a small restaurant, I washed dishes for a few coins. The owner didn't ask questions. The work was hard, but it gave me food. I cleaned tables, swept floors, carried garbage. I didn't complain. Every time I earned a few dollars, I hid them carefully inside my torn shoe. Slowly, I began to feel alive again. Not rich, not safe, but alive. At night, I found a small corner behind a bakery where the air smelled warm and sweet. The bakery's owner didn't push me away. Sometimes, they left extra bread outside. I would wait until the shop closed, take what was left, and whisper a thank you into the air. It wasn't comfort, but it was kindness. Weeks passed like that. My body grew thinner, my hair whiter, but my eyes stayed sharp. I didn't spend money on anything useless. Every coin I saved felt like a victory. I started to plan again. Small thoughts at first, small dreams. Maybe one day I could rent a tiny room. Maybe one day I could have a bed again. That thought kept me strong. Then one afternoon, while collecting bottles near a park, someone called my name. The voice was faint but familiar. I turned around and saw an old friend, a man I hadn't seen in years. He looked shocked at first, then sad. We sat on a bench together. For the first time in months, I spoke without fear. I told him everything, how my family threw me out, how they laughed at me, how I had been living like a ghost. He didn't speak much, he just listened. Then he said, "Come with me." We drove to a small house outside the city. It wasn't big, but it was clean. There was food, a warm bed, a roof. I cried that night, quietly, so no one would hear. After weeks of cold streets, I was finally sleeping under a roof again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like a person, not a burden. Days turned into weeks. My strength slowly returned. I helped around the house, sweeping floors, fixing small things, cooking simple meals. My friend didn't treat me like a beggar. He treated me like family. That kindness gave me back something my children had taken away, my dignity. Every night before sleeping, I looked at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "You're still here. You survived." Those words became my prayer. I realized I didn't need luxury. I just needed peace. I had lost everything, but I had kept my will. That will was worth more than gold. One evening, as I sat with my friend drinking tea, something came to my mind. A memory, a thought I had forgotten completely. It started as a small spark, then grew clearer. There was something important, that I still owned. Something my family never knew about. My heart started to beat faster. For the first time in months, I smiled, not out of relief, but because I remembered. I went to bed that night with a new kind of warmth, the warmth of hope. The streets had broken me, but they had also cleared my mind. I had been thrown away like nothing, but life had given me one more card to play, and this time I would use it. I sat at the small table in my friend's house, drinking tea slowly. The quiet felt good. My body was tired, but my mind was clear. For the first time in a long while, I could think without pain. That's when I remembered something I had buried deep in my memory. A house, a property I had bought many years ago. It wasn't here. It was far away, in Las Vegas. I had bought it quietly, back when business was good. I had planned it as an emergency asset, something my family could use if hard times ever came. But no one ever asked about it. They didn't even know it existed. I had almost forgotten it myself. Life had gone by, and the property sat untouched. I smiled a little, realizing how strange it was that my own family never cared enough to know what I owned. They had only been interested in what they could see, the mansion, the cars, the money that came easily. They never asked what I built behind the scenes. That hidden house was my secret, and now it was my key. I stood up and went to the small box where I kept my old papers. Among them were copies of property deeds and business contracts. My hands trembled as I searched through the pile, and there it was, the document for the Las Vegas house. My name printed clearly, the ownership still active. For a long time, I just stared at it. The paper felt heavier than gold. It wasn't just property. It was a chance. It was my way back. I sat down again and took a deep breath. That house had been empty for years. I had almost forgotten its worth. But Las Vegas had changed since then. The city had grown, prices had risen. That old property could be worth a fortune now. The thought made my heart beat faster. I hadn't felt excitement like this in years. It was like the world was giving me a second chance, one that no one could take from me this time. I thought about calling my family to tell them, but then I stopped. What would they do with that information? They had laughed when I slept on the street. They had thrown me away like trash. No, they didn't deserve to know. This time, I would keep it to myself. I would handle it quietly, just as I had handled everything else in my life. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted freedom. The next morning, I asked my friend if I could borrow a phone. I called a real estate agent I knew from years ago. The voice on the other end was surprised to hear from me. We talked briefly, and the agent promised to check the property's current value. Hours later, the call came back. The house was worth much more than I ever imagined. Millions. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time, my eyes closed, tears slipping down my face. Not tears of sadness, but relief. I realized then that life had a strange way of working. The same man who was thrown onto the street now held a fortune waiting to be claimed. The same man they had mocked would soon have more than all of them combined. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel pride. I just felt calm. It was as if the universe had been waiting for me to remember my own worth. I kept the papers close that night, under my pillow. It wasn't the money that gave me peace. It was the power of knowing I still had something of my own, something they couldn't steal or control. It was a quiet victory, one no one else knew about yet. I slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing tomorrow I would take the first real step toward my new life. In the morning, when I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see the broken man from the streets. I saw the same man who once built a life from nothing. The man who had been forgotten was now ready to rise again. The hidden card in my hand was more than property. It was proof that no matter how far someone falls, they can stand up again. And this time, when I stood, I would never let anyone push me down again. The morning after I remembered the Las Vegas house, I woke up early. The air felt different. I sat on the bed, holding the papers in my hands. My fingers traced my name on the property deed again and again. It felt real. For the first time in months, I had something that gave me power again. Not because of the money, but because it was mine. It belonged to no one else. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't shared. It was earned. I made myself a cup of tea and sat quietly by the window. The world outside was calm, but inside me, a storm of thoughts moved. I could have kept the house as a memory. I could have hidden it forever. But what would be the point? The people I saved it for had left me to starve. They had turned my love into their comfort and my kindness into their right. I looked at the papers again and whispered to myself, "No more saving for others." That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to keep that property for people who had thrown me away. I was going to sell it. I was going to turn it into something new, something that belonged to me alone. I didn't need to tell anyone. I didn't need to explain my reasons. The world had already seen me fall. Now it was time for me to rise quietly, without noise. I borrowed my friend's phone again and called the real estate agent. My voice was calm. I said I wanted the property sold quickly. The agent promised to handle everything. It took only a few days before buyers started showing interest. The location, the size, the history, it was valuable. The market had grown far beyond what I remembered. Within weeks, an offer came. It was high, higher than I ever imagined. $5 million. I sat quietly when the agent told me the number. I didn't react. I didn't shout, didn't smile. I just closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had been worth nothing to my family, but now, life had given me a value they could never ignore. When the sale was completed, the money went directly to my account. I checked it once. The zeros didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how peaceful I felt. I didn't think of revenge. I didn't think of showing off. My mind was clear. I only thought of one thing: starting again. I wanted to live without begging for love, without waiting for people who never cared. I wanted a life where silence meant peace, not loneliness. I decided to move out of my friend's house, Not because I was ungrateful, but because I needed to stand on my own again. I thanked my friend for everything, left a note, and took a small bag with me. I didn't carry much, just the papers and my will to rebuild. The next few days were full of small but powerful moments. I walked into a bank, opened a new account in my name alone, and saw the number on the screen. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like freedom. I walked out of the bank and stood under the sun, breathing deeply. I could go anywhere now. I could live anywhere. No one could throw me out again. That night, I stayed in a small hotel. The bed was soft, the air warm. I looked out the window and thought about how far I had come, from sleeping on the street to holding millions in my name. The world had changed, but I hadn't lost my soul. That was my real wealth. Before sleeping, I made one final promise to myself. I would use this money not to impress or punish, but to rebuild. To show that a man's worth doesn't end when others stop believing in him. To prove that respect cannot be taken, it must be earned back. And when the time came, I would walk into my old home, not as a broken man, but as the reminder of what they had lost when they lost me. After the sale was complete, everything began to change. The money was there, safe and real. For the first few days, I could hardly believe it. Each morning, I woke up early and checked the bank balance again, just to make sure it wasn't a dream. $5 million. It felt strange. Not because of the amount, but because of what it meant. It meant freedom. It meant no one could tell me I was worthless again. I started small. I bought new clothes, simple, clean, and comfortable. Nothing expensive, just enough to make me feel human again. The first time I looked in the mirror wearing those clothes, I didn't recognize myself. The man staring back looked strong again. My hair was trimmed, my face clean, my eyes steady. I smiled for the first time in months. Not a big smile, but a quiet one, full of relief. Then I found a small apartment in the city. It wasn't big, but it was peaceful. I paid the rent for a year in advance and filled it with only what I needed: a bed, a table, a chair, and a few plants by the window. It was my space, my world. No shouting, no judgment, no cold nights. I cooked my meals, made tea, listened to music softly. The quiet that once hurt now felt comforting. I began to walk through the city again, not as a lost man, but as someone who had found himself. The same streets where I once searched for food now saw me walking with calm confidence. No one looked at me with pity anymore. I had changed, inside and out. I no longer carried the weight of their betrayal. I carried purpose instead. I didn't tell anyone where I was. My family thought I was gone. They never called, never looked for me. That was fine. Let them believe I had vanished. It was better that way. I didn't want to go back until I was ready. I wanted to return not as the man they had thrown away, but as someone they could never ignore again. I spent my days quietly rebuilding. I invested a small part of my money into a local business, a small diner that helped feed poor workers. The owner treated me with respect, never knowing who I truly was. I didn't talk about my past or my wealth. I worked with the staff sometimes, serving food, cleaning tables. It wasn't about pride. It was about feeling useful again. The people who came to the diner reminded me of my old life. Tired faces, hardworking hands, honest eyes. They greeted me kindly. No one laughed at me here. That kindness healed me more than the money ever could. I realized that real wealth wasn't in the number in my bank account, but in how people treated each other. Each night, I sat by the window in my apartment, looking out at the city lights. The pain that once filled my heart was gone. It had turned into strength. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt my family. But I did want them to know what they lost. I wanted them to see the man they left on the street, not broken, but reborn. I began to plan the day I would return. I didn't want it to be sudden or loud. I wanted it to be calm. I wanted to walk through that same gate where they had laughed at me and let silence do the talking. I imagined the look on their faces, the disbelief, the shame, the shock. I didn't want to see them cry. I just wanted them to understand. I prepared everything slowly. I bought a car, hired a driver, and dressed in a simple suit. No need for gold, no need for noise. My power was quiet now. My dignity was my wealth. When I looked in the mirror that morning, I saw not an old man, but a survivor. A man who had been through fire and come out stronger. The world outside didn't know what was coming. My family didn't know the truth, but I did. The same man they had thrown out like trash was now worth more than their pride could ever measure. The same man they mocked was walking back, not to beg, not to forgive, but to show them who I truly was. Months passed before I finally decided it was time. I woke up one morning, dressed neatly, and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back didn't look like someone who had slept on the streets. My shoulders were straight, my eyes calm, my face clean. I picked up my coat, stepped into the car, and told the driver the address, the place that had once been my home, the same house where my family had laughed as I lay outside in the cold. The drive was quiet. I watched the city pass by, every building a reminder of how far I had come. When the car stopped in front of the gate, I took a deep breath. The house looked the same, the walls, the paint, the garden, all exactly how I remembered it. But what had changed was me. I wasn't the broken man they had thrown away. I was someone stronger, someone free. I stepped out of the car slowly. The sound of the engine caught their attention. My son came out first, followed by my daughter and her husband. Their faces changed when they saw me. Shock, confusion, then irritation. They didn't recognize the man standing there with confidence. I looked different, carried myself differently, but deep down, they knew. They walked closer, trying to act proud, but their voices shook slightly. They hadn't seen me in months. They thought I had disappeared forever. Now here I was, dressed well, calm, standing in front of them without fear. My daughter crossed her arms. My son frowned. My daughter-in-law stayed near the door, whispering something under her breath. They thought I had come back to beg again. They were wrong. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at the house, the windows, the balcony, the gate. Memories filled my mind. The nights I had sat outside this very gate, cold and hungry, listening to their laughter from inside. The mornings I had watched them leave without a glance. All those moments flashed before me, but there was no pain this time, only clarity. My son finally spoke first, his voice full of pride. "Why did you come back?" The words were sharp, but I didn't react. My daughter stepped forward and said coldly, "We don't owe you anything." I looked at them quietly. I didn't need to argue. The silence between us was heavier than any answer. I simply nodded, then smiled slightly. My son grew impatient. "Say something," he snapped, but I stayed calm. I looked around one last time, then said softly, "I didn't come here for help." The words caught them off guard. Their expressions changed. My calm voice carried weight. I took a step closer, my eyes steady. They waited, unsure what I would say next. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. I opened it slowly and looked at them. "I came here to buy this house," I said quietly. The words fell like thunder in the air. They froze. No one spoke. My son blinked, confused. My daughter's mouth opened slightly, her confidence gone. I continued, my voice steady. "I sold my property in Las Vegas. It brought $5 million. The silence that followed was heavy. No laughter, no arrogance, only shock. The man they had thrown away now stood in front of them, worth more than all of them combined. Their faces lost color. Their hands trembled. Their eyes darted between each other, searching for a reaction that didn't come. I looked at them one last time, calm and sure. I didn't need to say more. The truth had already spoken. I turned and began to walk back toward my car. Behind me, no one moved. The same people who once told me to leave now stood frozen, their pride shattered. The house they had claimed as theirs suddenly felt smaller, weaker, fragile. I didn't look back. The road ahead was waiting, wide and open. I sat in the car and closed my eyes for a moment. The driver asked softly, "Home, sir?" I nodded. The car started moving. Through the window, I saw the house disappear behind me. I felt no anger, only peace. I had returned not to beg, not to prove a point, but to remind them that the man they had laughed at had risen higher than their pride could ever reach. I didn't go far that day. After leaving the house, I asked the driver to stop at a quiet park nearby. I wanted a moment to breathe. The air felt lighter, the sky open. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and let the peace sink in. For years, I had carried the weight of rejection. Now, it was gone. My heart felt calm. I had faced the same people who threw me out and walked away with dignity. Inside the house I left behind, chaos had started. My family stood frozen in silence after hearing my words. The shock had turned into panic. My son ran after the car, shouting, but it was too late. My daughter sank into a chair, pale and shaking. My daughter-in-law whispered, $5 million? As if repeating it could make it less real. They all knew what that number meant. It was more than they could ever dream of. And the man they mocked now owned it. They realized too late what they had done. Every cruel word, every night they had laughed while I slept on the street, came back to them. It all replayed in their heads, but this time they weren't laughing. They were ashamed. They looked at the gate where I had once sat, alone and hungry, and the shame grew heavier. I had come back not as a beggar, but as a man who had won without needing revenge. News spread quickly. Neighbors who once whispered about the old man thrown out by his family now spoke about my return. People started asking questions. They told stories about how kind I used to be, how I built everything my family had. Those same neighbors who once ignored me now admired my strength. My family could hear the whispers through their windows. Every word felt like a wound. Their pride was gone, their reputation broken. My son tried to call me, again and again, but there was no answer. My daughter sent messages. None were read. They sent letters, apologies, promises, all ignored. For years, I had begged for a small place in their lives, and they had given me nothing. Now, they begged for my forgiveness, and I gave them silence. I spent those days quietly in my new apartment. I didn't celebrate or brag. I didn't need to. My peace was enough. Every morning, I made tea, sat by the window, and smiled at the sunrise. I no longer looked back in anger. I didn't want to punish them. Life had already done that for me. The moment I stood at their gate with wealth they couldn't imagine, justice had already been served. Sometimes I thought about calling them, not to speak harshly, but to tell them I was fine. Then I remembered how they looked at me when I had nothing. That memory kept my phone silent. They didn't deserve to hear my voice. They deserved the silence that reminded them of what they had lost. Days passed, and my story became known beyond the neighborhood. People talked about the old man who went from the streets to millions. Some said it was luck. Others said it was destiny. I didn't care what they said. I knew the truth. It was patience, not luck, that saved me. It was faith, not anger, that lifted me. I had learned that a calm heart was stronger than any revenge. One afternoon, I drove past my old house again. I didn't stop. I just looked through the window. The gate was open this time. My son was outside, sitting on the same step where I had once begged for kindness. The sight didn't make me angry. It didn't make me proud. It just made me sad. Not for myself, but for them. Because now they knew the value of what they had thrown away. I told the driver to keep going. As the house disappeared behind me, I felt free. I realized something important. I didn't need them anymore. Their acceptance, their love, their respect. None of it mattered. I had given them everything once, and they had turned it into pain. Now, life had given me peace, and I wasn't going to let them take that again. That night, I sat in my room, quiet and content. I looked around at the space that was truly mine. No noise, no insults, no false love. Just peace. I whispered to myself, this is what I was waiting for. And as I closed my eyes, I felt no hate, no regret, only freedom. After I left, the silence inside that house grew heavy. They didn't eat that night. They sat around the table, but no one spoke. The laughter that once filled the rooms was gone. The same walls that had echoed with pride now felt cold. My son looked at his phone again and again, hoping for a message that never came. My daughter stared at the floor, lost in shame. My daughter-in-law whispered about what people would say. They all felt the same thing: fear. The next morning, the neighbors began to talk. Word spread fast. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the story. "He came back with millions," someone said. "He bought the house," another whispered. My family heard every word. They couldn't step outside without seeing the looks. People who once envied them now looked at them with pity. The power they once held in the neighborhood had vanished overnight. They had turned their father into a joke, and now they were the joke. My son tried to explain himself to friends, but no one listened. "You kicked him out," they said. "You laughed when he had nothing." His voice cracked, trying to defend himself. He had no answer. My daughter stopped going out. She couldn't face anyone. My daughter-in-law cried often, not out of guilt, but out of fear of losing comfort. They were all trapped in the same house, surrounded by the same memories that used to make them proud. Bills started piling up. Without my support, their finances slowly fell apart. My son's business began to fail. Clients who once came because of my reputation started leaving. The bank called about late payments. The cars that once showed their success were now being sold one by one. The life they had built on arrogance was crumbling piece by piece. At night, they could not sleep. Every sound in the house reminded them of me. The sound of my chair, my voice calling them to dinner, the way I used to close the gate. They had erased me, but now my absence haunted them. The house that once felt like a symbol of wealth now felt like punishment. One day, my daughter went to my old neighborhood, trying to find me. She asked around quietly, hoping no one would recognize her. Some people told her they had seen me, looking healthy, happy, peaceful. She couldn't believe it. "He's fine?" she asked. "Yes," someone said. "Better than fine. He's free." Those words broke her. For the first time, she understood what she had lost. My son tried one last time to call me. This time, the phone connected. But there was only silence on my end. He whispered, "Dad, please." But before he could say more, I ended the call. That silence hurt more than any shout could have. It was the silence of finality, the sound of someone who had moved on. Weeks passed. They grew quieter, smaller. My daughter stopped talking. My daughter-in-law stopped complaining. My son stopped pretending to be proud. The house still stood tall, but inside, it was empty. They had all the space in the world, but no warmth, no father, no forgiveness. One evening, my son stood by the gate, the same place where I had once sat. He looked at the street, half hoping I would appear again. I didn't. The road was empty, just like his heart. He realized then that money could come and go, but respect, once lost, never returns. I hadn't taken revenge. I had simply taken my worth with me. And without me, the house was just bricks. My daughter looked through old photographs one night. Pictures of birthdays, holidays, smiles. Her hands shook as she turned each page. They had everything back then. Love, laughter, unity, all gone now because of pride. She closed the album, tears falling quietly onto the cover. It was too late to fix anything. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was slow, painful, and deserved. Every cruel word, every act of selfishness, every laugh at my pain had come back to them. The man they had thrown away had become stronger than they ever imagined. And they, the ones who thought they didn't need me, were now nothing without me. I lived quietly after that. No noise, no arguments, no visitors. My new house was big, peaceful, and filled with light. Every morning, I made my tea, opened the windows, and felt the air touch my face. I had everything I needed: food, comfort, and silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about who cared or who didn't. I was finally free from the weight of my own blood. Sometimes I thought about them, the house I built, the family that once called me useless. I didn't hate them. Hate would mean I still cared. What I felt was emptiness, the kind that comes when a wound finally closes. I had learned something hard and true. Love without respect dies fast. And once it dies, it never comes back. I looked around my new mansion, the one I bought with the money from Las Vegas. Everything was mine again. Every chair, every wall, every moment of peace. No one could throw me out this time. No one could tell me I wasn't welcome. The house was quiet, but the quiet didn't hurt anymore. It healed. I hired a small staff, kind people, polite and humble. They didn't know my story at first. To them, I was just a calm old man with kind eyes. Over time, they learned bits and pieces. They treated me with respect, not because of my money, but because of how I treated them. I spoke gently, paid them well, and never raised my voice. The same man my family called useless now gave others hope. At night, I sat on the balcony and watched the city lights. I thought about the nights I had slept on the street, cold and hungry. The memory no longer brought tears. It reminded me how far I had come. I realized that everything that happened, the pain, the rejection, the humiliation, had brought me here. Without those nights, I would never have discovered my strength. Sometimes I saw my family from a distance. Once, at a shopping center, I noticed my son across the road. The man looked tired, his clothes old, his eyes empty. I didn't go to him. I simply turned away. It wasn't revenge, it was peace. I had already forgiven them in silence, but forgiveness didn't mean returning. It meant letting go completely. I received letters sometimes, handwritten, full of apologies. I read them once, then placed them in a drawer. I didn't tear them, didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The man who once begged for their attention now lived a life they could only dream of. I didn't need to prove anything. My existence was proof enough. One morning, I walked through my garden and saw the flowers blooming. I smiled softly. "This is home," I said under my breath. The word home had meaning again. Not because of who was inside, but because of how it felt. Safe, warm, mine. Years passed quietly. I grew older, slower, but never bitter. People in the neighborhood knew me as the kind old man with the calm face. They didn't know the full story, and I didn't tell it. I didn't need the world to know what my family had done. The only thing that mattered was that I survived it. Before sleeping each night, I sat in my chair, closed my eyes, and thought of one thing: peace. That was all I ever wanted, and now I had it. No more noise, no more judgment, no more pretending. The last time I thought of my family, I didn't feel pain. I just hoped they had learned something. That respect matters more than comfort. That kindness should never be forgotten. That pride destroys faster than poverty. I wished them well, even if they would never know it. I looked around my mansion one last time before turning off the lights. Everything was quiet, warm, alive. The same man they had laughed at on the streets now lived in peace, not revenge. I had lost everything once: love, home, dignity, but in the end, I found something better: myself. And that was the closure I never thought I'd find.